Wonderful. It is a great pleasure to welcome all of you, both on Zoom and at the University of Maryland, to what we hope is going to be a slightly novel setup, but a very scholarly set of presentations. As you all know, this is the inaugural Jonathan Sunshine Conference in Yiddish Studies, and I am Max Grossman, the director of the Joseph and Rebecca Meyerhoff Program and Center for Jewish Studies at University of Maryland. We've been having a lot of fun here in a session yesterday evening and in a session this morning, but we didn't want the fun to stay only on campus. So we have brought in a truly global panel, and I am very, very pleased to welcome you all here today. The format of the panel is going to be two 1-hour sessions, each following the other. We will begin with Kamil Kijek, because he's the furthest east, and then Torres will speak after. And I am just really delighted to have you all here. I want to say a special thanks, as always, to Eli Saltzman and Avis Kweeman, to Rongrong Zhang, and to Lisa Klein, all of whom have contributed intensely to this conference. Thank you, Eli, for being the master of ceremonies in the party room. And thank you, Avis, for absolutely everything. That being said, I am delighted to welcome you all here. Once again, with thanks to the Sunshine family and especially Helen Sunshine, let us begin. I think that I will introduce Kamil first and let him speak, and then Anna will have her own session in the hour that follows. Kamil Kijek is an assistant professor at the Taub Department of Jewish Studies in the University of Wrocław in Poland. He has been a Prince Foundation postdoctoral fellow at the Center for Jewish History in New York and the Sosland Family Fellow at the Jack Joseph and Morton Mandel Center for Advanced Holocaust Studies at the United States Holocaust Memorial Museum in Washington, D.C. He's also been a Gerda Henkel Research Fellow at the Wiener Wiesenthal Institute for Holocaust Studies and Senior Research Fellow at the Center for Holocaust Studies in Munich. So you have studied, learned, and taught in many places. His current book is entitled Polish Shtetl After the Holocaust, ? Cold War, Jewish World, and Jewish Community of Zherzhona, 1945 to 1950. I did it. Thank you. Your guidance helped. And his talk today is titled Modern and Radical, Yiddish and Other Languages in the Lives of Polish Jewish Youth in Interwar Poland. Kamil, the floor is yours. Thank you all for joining us.
Thank you very much, Maxine, and thank you to all of you for having me here and listening to my talk. Let me start with sharing of my screen. I'll be very grateful for confirmation that you see the screen, that everything is good. Okay. So my talk today will be based on parts of my book, Modern and Radical: Politics, Culture, and Socialization of the Jewish Youth in Interwar Poland. And my goal is to present some of the observations on the sociology of Yiddish language and its place among other languages used by the Jews in the lives of last generation of Polish Jews, that is the Polish Jewish youth that came to the adulthood in the 1930s, in the last decade before the Holocaust that decimated and destroyed the second biggest Jewish community at the time in the world. And the main goal of my talk is to problematize and partly challenge the vision of pre-Holocaust Poland as a Yiddish land, idealized place of Arteheim with absolute domination of Yiddish language, uncontested by the acculturative pressures of modernity. And in order to do so, we need to have a short, fast look at the language statistics regarding Interwar-Polish Jewry. As we all know, Poland as a modern state was created in 1918, and it had more than 3 million of Jewish population.
Okay, we will. I suspect that Kamil got cut off. I'm hoping that he will be right back with us. There you go, Kamil. All good?
I hope, but I need to share schema. I don't know why, what happened. Let me start again. Okay. Maxine, do you hear me? And yeah? Okay. So, as we all know, Poland as a modern state was created in 1919 and it had 3 millions of Jewish citizens. And in the moment when Jews became the citizens of Interwar Polish state, indeed Yiddish was absolute dominant language among the decisive majority of Polish Jews. There was a small strata of maybe maximum 200,000 of Polish speaking, daily Polish speaking Jewish bourgeoisie, the higher, the richer Jewish bourgeoisie. Hebrew, of course, was used by the Orthodox elites in a religious context and also by small part of secularized Zionist or Zionist-leaning Jewish intelligentsia. But there was no doubt that the Yiddish was a dominant language, and this is corroborated by the statistics. The basic statistics, language statistics of Interwar Polish Jewry. The first one that I wanted to present is are the results of 1931 national census, where its participants were asked, among other questions, to declare their mother tongue. And as you see, 80% of the people who declared the Mosaic faith, because there was no nationality declaration in this particular census, 80% of Jews who 80% of people who declared Judaism as their religion declared Yiddish as their mother tongue, 12% Polish, and 8% Hebrew. And of course, we need to be cautious with these statistics because, as it was proved by Ezra Mendelssohn and few other scholars, indeed, much almost nobody really spoke Hebrew at home they on daily basis, and the Hebrew was not a mother tongue of 8% of Polish Jews, and these were simply the declarations made, political declarations made by the Zionists, who urged their followers to declare Hebrew because the Polish state abolished the nationality declaration in a census. Also, there were cases, proven cases of some Hasidim from Galicia, especially, who daily, of course, spoke Yiddish, but from many political reasons declared Polish as a mother tongue. There were some people who spoke better Polish, but declared Yiddish because of their nationalist or national identity. But nevertheless, there is no doubt that the Yiddish was dominant mother tongue in which people spoke at their family homes. And this is also corroborated by the language statistics of Jewish youth autobiographies sent to the free EVO contest in 1932, 1934, and 1939. And as you can see on the statistics of the autobiographies, 73% were written in Yiddish, 20% in Polish, 5% Hebrew, and few were in the mixed languages. But again, these statistics of young people writing for the EVO context very much is similar, reflects what was declared in the national census. And again, we have a few when we read EVO autobiographies, we have a few writers you can see that they would write their autobiographies better in Polish, but they would write in Yiddish because they were writing for EVO contest. But nevertheless, again, Yiddish, you can see while analyzing closely autobiographies that Yiddish was their mother tongue. So there is no doubt that for the decisive majority of Polish Jews, also for the last generation before the Holocaust, Yiddish was a Mameloshen language in which they spoke in early childhood with their parents and often with their peers on the streets and cities, on the streets of the cities and in the shtetls. And as all of us or some of us know, Interwar Poland, following Ezra Mendelssohn, was called a laboratory of Jewish national modernity before the Holocaust. So, with all the anti-Jewish violence and very strong political anti-Semitism and discrimination about which I will mention it also at the end of my talk, but nevertheless, besides that, Poland gave Interwar Poland, especially comparing to the previous periods, to the Tsarist period before 1914, gave unprecedented freedom for activity of all Jewish political movements and their cultural activities. And in 1918, for many Yiddishists, it was a hope for a new period, more democratic, but also the period that will be kind of great for development of the Yiddish language in this new, more democratic reality. And again, when we look at the main political streams, the main political movements among Polish Jews in Poland, we can see that the Yiddish was very much present almost in all of them. And I'm starting with two most popular, not with Yiddish's Bundism or Folkism, but I'm starting with Zionism and Orthodoxy, the two movements much more popular than Bundism and Folkism, but both of them having very strong Yiddish component. Now, of course, Zionist movement was very much critical about the Yiddish as a language in the diaspora, but when we look at the leaflets, the activity of the cells of the Zionist parties from right-wing Beitar and the Zionist religious Mizrahi up to Polazion left or Polazion right, and etc., we can see that in practice Yiddish was very much used there along Hebrew and Polish. And of course, the main language of the Orthodoxy uh, on a speaking level, on the level of publication, etc., was also Yiddish. And then we have a very Yiddishist, yes, Bundist and Folkist movement. And it's also important to mention then Polish communism, Polish Communist Party, or all Communist Party active in ethnic Ukraine and Belarus, also the Jewish cells, the cells that were working mainly with the poor Jewish population, very much also used Yiddish. So Yiddish was very much present also in a practical daily activity of the communist movement. So at the end of the day, we can see that the Yiddish is still language of a tradition and a religion and orthodoxy, but also we have a component that we can call radical Yiddish as the name of our conference. That is, the Yiddish becomes a language also of generational rebellion of the young people against the word and traditions of their parents and grandparents. And then together with the development of Yiddish press, unprecedented, Yiddish literature, and all the cultural institutions, Kulturliga, Ivo, Yiddish theater, etc., etc., we can really see that the Yiddish is widening the scope of its kind of activity and functioning. It's entering new spheres of life, and it describes the new spheres of life. And there is no coincidence that on this presentation I gave you two photos. One which is of Chachmei Yeshiva in Lublin, that is the flagship Orthodox institution, and second is the Jugend, that is the one of the newspapers of Borochov Jugend, the youth movement of Polazion left, the radical left Zionist movement, to show that what I said at the beginning, that these two main Zionist and Orthodox domain political movement also very much use Yiddish. So far, from all of I said, we could infer that maybe indeed Interwar Poland was an unproblematic continuation of absolute domination of Yiddish language in the life of Interwar Polish Jewry, and that Yiddish was so strong as never before or even stronger. And the thing is that it was actually not the case. And in order to address this problem, I want to first to read the quotation from the autobiography of one of the very unique participants of the EVO autobiographical contest, Gershon Pive, who was actually younger brother of one of the EVO Zamlers, and who submitted his autobiography to the EVO contest. And in the beginning of his autobiography, he wrote, I was thinking in what language I should write my autobiography, in Yiddish, in Hebrew, or in Polish. There are things in which I think in Yiddish. These are mainly problems of my daily life, about land of Israel, things connected to Zionism, I think in Hebrew. But there are also a few things about which I think in Polish, about schools, Polish and general history, world geography, and so on. I have decided to write my autobiography in Yiddish, since half of it at least will be about my daily life. So we could think that that Gershon Pipe represents the majority or typical young Jewish person who, depending on the social context, is using Yiddish, Hebrew, and Polish. But it was not the case, because Gershon Pipe was from very specific and kind of privileged Jewish milieu in Interwar Poland. He finished elite header that was accessible only for a small number of Jewish boys and not girls, of course. Then he studied in Polish and also in Zionist Talmud High School, that again was not so accessible for most of the young Jews. And he had very deep traditional Orthodox and also secular education. He came from really well-to-do merchant and intellectual milieu. So this quotation from the Gershon Pipe autobiography shows us that we need to kind of critically and sociologically approach this kind of declarations, and and start to kind of ask the question if really young Polish Jews in Poland were this kind of generation of polyglots freely roaming among all of these free languages as Gershon Pipe did. And it was not the case. First of all, before I will go to the education, to the schooling, we need to remember that Interwar Poland was a space of a very strong, radical, and intense culture kampf, that is culture rivalry and culture fight between Zionist, Yiddishist, um, and also faced a very strong acculturation or assimilation pressure of the Polish state. And again, class divisions, economically very limited access to secondary and higher education, and a lack of acceptance of Yiddish as a Jewish national language by the Polish state. All these very much influence the status and the place of Yiddish, and if you can really see it, we can also really see it in the Jewish education in Inter Poland. And what you see here is these are the statistics of Jewish children in a school age between 7 and 14 studying in the school year 1934-1935. And as you can see, 80% of these 450,000 Jewish kids were studying in Polish public schools with non-Jewish languages there, and 40% in Jewish private schools, and 20% are those who studied at the same time if, in both of the schools. And you can see, as you can see below, in the biggest secular Jewish school system, that is the Zionist Tarbut network, that had around 440,000 pupils at the time. Hebrew and Polish were the languages taught with almost non-presence of the Yiddish language. CISO, the flagship Yiddishist and Yiddish teaching institution, had only 15,000 pupils, and indeed Yiddish was a primary language there, taught along Polish one. In Zionist religious Yavne schools, Hebrew and Yiddish and Polish were taught 20,000 people in Shulkult, very small network of left-wing Zionists, Hebrew, Yiddish, and Polish. And indeed, Yiddish was very strong in Chorev, that is in the Orthodox school system, where Yiddish and Hebrew were taught among some Polish, and it also includes Beis Yankev Orthodox schools for girls, that 20%, the 20,000 of its pupils indeed learn Yiddish in that school. So you can really see that the Yiddish is strong and present in the Jewish education, but again, we also should see that the private Jewish education, besides Cheder, that is a basic institution of basic education, is not available to many of the young people from a very obvious reason, that is the economical one. The state schools are the only primary schools who are free, and these are the schools that most of the Jewish parents can afford. All the other schools that you can see below, private Jewish schools, are the schools for which one needs to pay. And here you see statistics mainly concerning the primary schooling. In a high school education, situation is even more complicated. And these schools, their tuitions sometimes cost 3 or 4 months' salaries of low-paid workers or artisans, and most of the Jewish parents simply cannot, as other Christian parents, simply cannot afford to send their kids to the private Jewish schools, both Tarbut, Sisho, or other or of other types. So the paradox is that as you can see, that the Yiddish language, not in form spoken as it was taught in Cheder, because Melamed was speaking Yiddish to the kids, but in form of sophisticated, highly developed language that would enable you to write sophisticated things, to read literature, etc., was taught in minority of the educational establishments in which Jewish kids went in Poland, and it was mainly made from the, as I said, economic reasons. One also needs to underline that the Yiddish school institutions, especially the official network, were especially discriminated by the Polish state because it was considered that it's spreading the leftist, anti-government, anti-state views. And all this caused a really strong acculturation of a Polish Jewish youth in Poland. And you can see in these three quotations from three different people: Max Weinreich, Zalman Reisen, Yiddishist activist of Vivo, but also Nathan Bystrycki, visiting at the time from Land of Israel, activist of the Hebrew education. All of them and all other Jewish culture activists, also including Orthodox one in 1930s, very strongly stress that the more and more Jewish youth is actually starting speaking and using Polish in their daily life. And actually, this is corroborated also by various statistics of Jewish libraries from Interwar Poland. And here I prepared five different statistics. First is the statistics of books loans from major Jewish libraries in Interwar Poland in 1926. That 33% of books were borrowed there in Yiddish and 31% in Polish. But already Boris Temkin's research on books loaned from 50 Warsaw Jewish libraries in 1933 shows that half of the books borrowed from the libraries were in Polish and 25% in Yiddish and 10% in Hebrew. And again, very interesting statistic was provided by Herman Kruk. It was a survey of youth readership in Warsaw libraries, again done in 1933. And as the Kruk survey shows, 17% of the young people read only in Yiddish, 8% only in Polish, and 75% had no preferences, that is, they were reading in both, so it was the dominant pattern. And finally, when we see the last statistic from 1937 concerning the children, that is the book loans from CBK, Zentralsbildungskomitee, that is the main Yiddishist educational institution in Vilna, the capital, like the center of the Yiddishism in Poland. You can see there that again, more than 75% of the books loaned there were borrowed in Polish. And again, it was in Vilna, that is the most Yiddishist, Yiddish speaking of all of the major Polish Jewish communities. And this image is also very much corroborated by the Evo autobiographies that I mentioned before, that if we analyze which books were quoted and cited the most in the Evo autobiographies of the Jewish youth, and also the ones who were written in Yiddish, you can see that most quoted actually books were the ones that children read in the primary schools, mostly state ones, or they kind of read via influence of the mass culture, dominant mass state culture. And these were books in Polish of the Polish famous writers, Mickiewicz, Słowacki, Sienkiewicz, Kraszewski, Dołęga Mostowicz, and so on and so on, both kind of mainstream nationalist literature and also popular and shunt literature in Polish. Other literature, very popular, read mostly in Yiddish translation, was the Western or international literature, Romain Rolland, Julius Verne, Karl May, Gorky and Tolstoy, etc. And again, the popular, also very popular in these autobiographies, are Yiddish classics, Shalom Aleichem, Mendele Moicher Sorim, and Itzhak Lake Peretz. But what is stunning, when we look in the autobiographies on evidence of reading of the modern, that is the current Yiddish literature, Bergelson, Pfeffer, Peretz Markish, and etc., there is a much, much less quotations or even mentioning of this literature. The same with the contemporary Hebrew literature. Both Haskalah and Modernism that read in Hebrew was rarely mentioned by most of the authors. So in general, to sum up, Polish language, Polish readership, and Polish cultural consumption was on the rise among the young Jews in Poland, and it was even corroborated during the Holocaust to a great chagrin by the circle of Emanuel Ringelblum and his Onek Shabbat group, that, to the great dismay, they observed that most of the young people in Warsaw Ghetto during the Holocaust speak and use Polish. So, summing up, what we have, what the general picture emerges. First of all, that Interwar Poland and Interwar Polish Jewish community was not so much unique. That with all the fundamental differences now it's standing, in terms of acculturation to the state dominant language and dominant direction of cultural evolution observed among the Jews all over the world in the period, Poland was not so much different from United States, where we had a dominant direction of acculturation into the English language, not from the Soviet Union where into Russian, or not to the different from Jewish issue in Palestine where the acculturation into Hebrew language progressed. And of course, this all had a very strong generation dimension, as it is attested even on this photo that you can see uh, in front of you. That again, in Interwar Poland, with all the differences, the dominant language that we had acculturation to the Polish language, of course, slower than acculturation into English in the United States or into Russia in Soviet Union, but still ongoing and progressing. But of course, what was made Poland different was, from the one side, strength of traditional and Orthodox religious community that are very strongly kept, of course, Yiddish language as the dominant. Another important factor is the strength, of course, of state level and popular anti-Semitism. Physical and symbolic violence, social and cultural and professional anti-Jewish discrimination present in almost all dimensions of Jewish life. That, of course, is kind of slowing the pace of the Jewish acculturation, but never stopping it. So, what we have from all this? What is the general picture of interwar Polish Jewish culture? First of all, as I said, Polish acculturation is continuing, but what makes Poland special as a diaspora community, this Polish acculturation is combined with simultaneous dominance of Jewish identity and modern Jewish identity as modern national religious, or Orthodox ethno-religious one. That is, Polish acculturation results in particular Jewish national Polish Jewish culture, which is not assimilation. Because again, speaking Polish, it's very common to speak Polish, to read Polish literature, but to feel fully and 100% nationally Jewish, which is very specific to interwar Poland. And on macro level, as it was observed by Honeš Meruk, indeed, in the interwar Polish Jewish culture is a trilingual Polish system of Yiddish, Polish, and Hebrew. But on the level of the daily life or of particular daily life of particular Jewish youth, we can actually see the dominance of Yiddish-Polish hybrid with some presence of elements of Hebrew, because pure Yiddish or pure Polish cultural stances are in minority, and pure Hebrew cultural stances are almost non-existent. So at the end of the day, in Interwar Poland, Yiddish was losing its total dominance in Polish Jewish life, but not Yiddishkeit, which was functioning in Yiddish and also in post-vernacular Yiddish dimension, that is in Polish as a part of unique Polish Jewish culture forming, beside the land of Israel, the most national of the Jewish community in the Jewish world. And all this was destroyed by the Holocaust, and then by post-war tragic reality of Holocaust survivors, and by their emigration from Poland. Thank you.
Kamil, thank you so much. That was remarkable. I have many, many questions for you, and I will try to resist. I just want to say one small thing, that the way you presented that as a story that moved from a point to a future point felt remarkable. I think we have a tendency to read only backwards when we think about Polish Jewish history, and you gave us an opportunity to read forward, which I think was just remarkable. I would encourage anyone in the Zoom call to please put your questions in the chat. And folks who are in the watch party room, you can share your questions with Eli Saltzman, and he will put them in the chat as well. I'd like to start with a question from Theo Stone, who says, the statistic from the 1920 census is interesting, that 8% of Jews identified Hebrew as their first language. And do you believe this to be an aspirational declaration? And can you say more about that rather than an actual one?
Do we collect, or I should answer right away?
Why don't you answer right away, and we will see what other questions.
Okay, yes. So as I tried to say, I was probably speaking too fast. Yes, this 80% in the declaration 1931 census was, yes, aspirational. You are totally right, and it was made mainly because of that in a census that was before in 1921 there was a declaration of nationality. That is, the Jews could declare. But you in 1921 you were declaring your faith, Judaism, and then you could declare your nationality, Polish, Jewish, or even some of the people would declare German. But in 1931, Polish authorities, mainly to attack or to downplay the strength of Ukrainian nationalism, which was the most problematic from the point of view of the state, liquidated the nationality declaration in order to Polonize some of the Ukrainians. And then, because of that, many of the Jewish national activists, as well as Ukrainian ones, called their followers, said to them, even if you speak daily Polish, declare the Jewish language, and Zionists asked them declare Hebrew language to order to show the strength of the Jewish nationality. So, and it was proved by Ezra Mendelssohn and many other people that many Zionist speaking, Polish speaking Zionists, because a lot of the Polish kind of richer Polish Jewish bourgeoisie was actually daily speaking Polish, and they would go and declare Hebrew in order to show their national commitment. So of course you had so Zionists, there were much more Zionists than 8% in Polish society, but most of them declared Polish and Yiddish. But these 8% who declared Hebrew, of course, most of them did not spoke Hebrew in the daily life. It was aspirational. But as I said and I showed, of course, many of these people studied Hebrew in Zionist schools, in Tarbut schools, in Yavne schools, in Shulkult schools, in youth movements, and some of them also in higher Chadarim and yeshivot. But it was very different studying Hebrew or even reading Hebrew. It was very different than speaking it daily or considering as a mother tongue. And so you are right; it was aspirational.
Thank you very much. We've had a question from Craig Yoakum, who is joining us on Zoom. Thank you so much, Craig, for being here. Craig would like to know what were popular titles of books borrowed in the libraries in the interwar years, Yiddish, Hebrew, or Polish, Yiddish, Hebrew, and Polish. And then we also have a question from the room. So would you like to address that first?
Yeah, so I could, all of the, as I said, all of the like popular ritual titles, Sholem Aleichem, Tevye the Milkman, all the works of Peretz. I remember Monish, for example, mentioned in many autobiographies. All the different works of Zalman Schneur, Shkloveriden, etc. But also very, popular was Schund literature, and many authors actually also mentioned Meisterbücher. These small booklets of Yiddish literature Polish. But again, the popular and Schund literature is much more popular than the highbrow one. The same is regarding the Polish leadership. No, only small amount of authors really quotes this highbrow Polish language literature. Most of them quote Mickiewicz, Słowacki, Sienkiewicz, all the basic authors that they know from schools, or Helena Miszkówna or Tadeusz Dołęga-Mostowicz. We are actually these are authors of Polish popular literature, which is they read the most hot books at the time, who are also screened and showed in a cinema. So Polish Jewish youth, again, they're not different to the youths in other areas of the world today, and to the today's youth. And again, it's very interesting about the Hebrew literature that only small amount of Jewish young people can really read sophisticated Hebrew literature, and that's what I meant speaking about two kind of two dimensions of this literature. One, Haskalah or post-Haskalah early Zionist literature like Peretz Smolenskin, Ahad Ham, and before Haskalah El Klilenblum and etc. This was only read by people like Pipe, very small group of intellectuals. Actually, many of them, unlike Pipe, who were graduates of the yeshivot, and then only they went to they kind of went out from the Orthodox world, but they had a very elitarist Orthodox education. It was a very small group because most of the people from traditional milieus never reached yeshivot, never reached, the higher hedarim. But what is important to note that a lot of Zionist literature is translated into Polish. So many of these things are written. I read in Polish, and some national poets like Bialik, of course, are published also in Yiddish. Bialik, as we all know, both wrote in Hebrew and in Yiddish, so he could be read in Yiddish or in Polish. So that is my kind of a preliminary answer to this question.
Thank you so much. I'm delighted to call on Professor Marcia Rosenblatt to share a question of her own. And again, please feel free to put your questions in the chat or raise your hand. Marcia?
Okay, thank you very much can you hear me? It's
Yeah.
all good, right? Thank you very much for an extremely interesting talk. I love the complexity of the language situation. And I just want to share, it's not really a question, but I want to share a little anecdote about Salo Baron, the great Jewish historian Salo Baron, who is from Austrian Galicia. Later, it became Poland, although he left Poland and studied in Vienna and so forth. But at the University of Vienna, where he became a student in 1915, they asked, of course, not about nationality, but about Muttersprache, language, mother tongue. And he wrote Hebrew. Why did he write Hebrew? For exactly the reason you said. He didn't know Hebrew. I mean, he knew Hebrew, but he knew Hebrew from yeshiva. He didn't know how to speak modern Israeli Hebrew. And in fact, when he testified at the Eichmann trial in 1961, he testified in Hebrew and apparently had a lot of trouble. But he wrote Hebrew because he felt he was a member of the Jewish nationality. And it was like a shtuchen auge, it was he was poking the eye of the Austrian authorities by saying that he was a member of the Jewish nationality. Not just him, it was the Zionist thing to do. So I just wanted to add that, it wasn't just in interwar Poland that Jews sometimes wrote Hebrew just to make the statement about their membership in the Jewish nation. Thanks.
Thank you, Marcia. Kamil, would you like to comment on that?
Yeah, I can just add another anecdote about the quotation that I wanted to give, also to share with you, and I did not share it. I left it for my other talk in Evo in 3 weeks from now. But you had in a Zionist discourse in 1930s, and it's very much addressing what Professor Rosenblatt said, that you had a lot of this anti-assimilation discourse, Zionist discourse in Polish, complaining why the Polish Jews are acculturating. And the most fascinating thing is that a lot of this is happening in Polish. So, for example, Ariel Tartakower, the most important sociologist of the Polish Jews in 1930s, he writes about this, acculturation which destroys the Jews intellectually, that the only language that expresses the pure Jewish national soul is Hebrew, etc., etc. And he writes in a beautiful literary Polish, which of course it was a language that he knew much better than Hebrew. So of course, again, I want to underline that Hebrew was very important and modern Hebrew was on the rise because it was taught in many places, but then speaking it as fluently and as deeply as Hebrew, as Yiddish or in Polish, was available only to very small amount of people. And one last anecdote, there is one Evo autobiography that describes the visit to Poland of Chaim Nachman Bialik. And it's autobiography of a young Zionist, member of Freiheit, and then later Polizeion Right, 100% Hebraist, who of course speaks daily Yiddish in his milieu. And he listens to Bialik, and then he sees the Bialik going backstage and speaking Yiddish. And he's like mad and astonished how this, national poet can speak, Yiddish. And probably Bialik, wanted to just enjoy the language of his Mameloshen in his, country that he visited from Palestine in the beginning of 1930s. So yeah.
That is wonderful. Diego Rotman, would you like to ask your question?
Thank you very much, Kamil. I was thinking when you were talking about the symbolic status of Hebrew at that time, that in a way it's like the opposite of the post-vernacular that Chandler was talking about Yiddish in post-Holocaust. The Hebrew was pre-vernacular in Poland. But my question is, if you can expand regarding the cultural situation, because theater, for example, was, of course, mostly Yiddish and, of course, Polish, but also not only about the libraries, about the publications or Yiddish press and books. If you can also say something about the statistics. Thank you.
Okay. So yeah, thank you. Very great question. Although I need to say that there are people and there are publications of people much more qualified to answer it. In terms of cultural situation, indeed, among the daily Polish Jewish press, the two most dominant titles, Der Moment and Heit, are in Yiddish. But what you can see in the discourse in Haydn Yiddish that in 1930s they're already afraid that young people is more and more reaching for a Polish language publication, and indeed you have a very strong Jewish national press. Mostly of Zionist political sympathies, like Nowy Dziennik, like Nasz Przegląd, like Chwila from Lviv, Galicia, that was mentioned here before, that is already in Polish. And so again, I think this reflects the generational shift, the fact that most of the, as I said, most of the young people from the younger generation is still able to read Yiddish, but it's more and more preferring Polish, and probably in a generation from there already the Polish would be absolutely dominant. One can also see it in the fact that even the Bundist, the Zukunft movement, starts to publish some of its publication in Polish in the end of 1930s, because it notices that more and more of its young members, especially from bigger cities, speaks daily already Polish. So answering your question, Diego, in terms of language representation in the Jewish culture in Poland, Yiddish is still dominant, but Polish is on the rise. And I want to say that the only Hebrew language daily, Hatzfira, bankrupt like 3 times, I think, in Poland. They tried to renew it, they couldn't. So actually, Zionists published more in Polish and even in Yiddish than in Hebrew, from the obvious reasons that we discussed before. Thanks.
I'm fascinated by your reference to youth culture, and in some ways, young people will be young always. But I'm also curious to know about how youth culture relates here to genre fiction. Because we're talking about a period when people were reading detective stories and people were reading, racy romances and young women in modernity and stuff like that. Were these kids reading Polish versions of those things? Were there Jewish versions of those things? Or were they reading translations from other languages? Is it the English language pulp fiction? Where are they getting their pulp fiction?
That's a fascinating question that I cannot fully answer, and because the main source that I used in my research, Evo Autobiographies of the Jewish Youth, do not allow always to answer these questions. So, in terms of Romance literature, for example, Romain Rolland, the author of the most popular, I think, novel read by the Polish and Jewish youth in Poland, was both translated into Polish and into Yiddish. So, mostly in Yiddish autobiographies, they write about Romain Rolland, and many of them, for sure, probably most of them read him in Yiddish translation, but many of them in Polish, of course. And the same goes with Karl May. And I'm pretty sure that Tolstoy or Gorky, they read more in Polish or in Yiddish than in Russian. Although from the eastern borderland, some of them in Vilna would probably read also in Russian, but then again, it was more characteristic from the older generation to know read Russian than to the young ones. So again, as it was mentioned and written about by Nati Cohen, Karolina Szymaniak, many scholars, as I said, answering Diego's question, who did the research on this much deeper than I did, Yiddish culture in Poland was very much about the translation. I think, I don't remember correctly, but half of the books published in Yiddish, or 35% or half, I don't remember exactly, but really amazing figure, were translations. And Polish literature was translated, American English literature was very much translated, French one, Russian, etc., etc. So again, also you could reach and read international literature in the English translation. So again, it attests to the livelihood, kind of, I miss the English word, the vitality of the Yiddish culture in Poland. But again, it's a vitality which is a hybrid vitality, because the same concerns the Polish culture consumption. So the international also consumpting Polish along consumpting Yiddish. And that's why it's another dimension of this Polish-Yiddish hybrid, which is a part, again, of a Jewish national culture, not of the assimilation process, because the Jews were not going nowhere. They were now, seeping into the air, because they had a very strong national consciousness.
I can't say strongly enough how much you're helping me to see things through a very different lens. I'm pleased to present Will Pimlott with a question for you now. And again, feel
Lovely.
free to ask.
Did I unmute? Yes, I did unmute. Hello, Kamil. Very nice to see you on the screen. Fascinating and kind of revisionist talk. I'm moved by this argument you're saying that actually the Polish Jewish culture wasn't an exception, but adhered to the norm, namely that Jews were assimilating, although you said it wasn't assimilating, but developing hybrid cultures wherever they were. Can you say something about the power of the state and local government in that transformation? I mean, obviously, I felt a slight anti-Bundist vibe to the whole presentation, which I know you're shaking your head, but, just because you go to a school, I mean, doesn't mean you end up sharing that school's ideology. And so I was wondering if, I know there's endless back and forth about how much influence did the Bund actually have in the late 1930s. So can you say something about the state, local government, and language politics in that comparative perspective, where basically Mandate Palestine is the only exception, because it's the only place where and probably that's because there wasn't that active estate building process going on in the Mandate. And then secondly, there's this tantalizing counterfactual that is often used against Yiddishists to say, look, you say the Holocaust is what interrupted the flourishing of modern Yiddish culture, but actually everyone was beginning to speak Polish anyway. I felt like you were, in saying that, no, they were developing a hybrid Polish-Yiddish culture, you're kind of actually bringing more nuance to that debate. But still, could you address that question head on and tell us, if the Holocaust hadn't happened, would the majority of the Jews around the world be speaking Yiddish today?
Okay, Will, great question, but I will answer the first part. I will not dare to answer the last one. What would happen if not the Holocaust? So, but I will answer the first part of this really great question. So, in terms of ideology of the state, it's a very important thing, because first of all, as I said, ideology of the state was not assimilationist, but a culturationist one. That is, the state very strongly discriminated the Jewish national culture, and Yiddish one much more strongly than Hebrew, because of the connection of the former to the socialist movement, especially to the Bund. And the Yiddish schools are harassed by the government. In my other research, and I write also about this in the book, in the Modern Radical, many Yiddish schools are closed. The teachers' seminar in Vilna, the flagship of the Yiddish secondary education, is closed by the authorities in the first half of 1930s, because of supposedly communist agitation, and the pretext was to talk about the Birobidzhan, and authorities used the pretext to close the school. And so, first of all, state fights the Yiddish culture, because state wants the young Jews to acculturate, to popularize among them the Polish culture, in order to build the allegiance of the young Jews of the state. And you are very much right, Will, that that if someone goes to the school doesn't mean that he or she buys the school's ideology. And exactly it was the case in the Young Jews. In my book, I write a lot about the experience of the young people in Polish state schools, and I describe it as a broken promise. So these young people are taught in the schools that it's a free Poland, that they're the citizens of the state, and they have equal rights. But all the reality actually proves that they don't have equal rights. I write in my book that for this new acculturated generation, experience of anti-Semitism is much more strong and painful than experience of their parents, because that's the anti-Semitism of the figures who are culturally close to themselves. It's the anti-Semitism not of some abstract goy, but of a teacher, or of a classmate or a schoolmate. So it makes them actually, Polish school, contrary to the goal of the government, makes them much more nationally Jewish, kind of confident that we are Jews and only Jews than the state wanted. But this does not mean that these people not get acculturated on the level of the language. They get acculturated, so they read more Polish, they go more to the Polish theater, they are much more embedded in the Polish cultural symbols, because that's the language of the school and of the dominant mass culture that surrounds them. But that does not change their national identity. And as I'm showing in the book, they actually national identity is stronger and stronger among the younger generation of the Jews. You can also see it in the statistics of university students who were asked by the different Jewish university students in Warsaw were asked by the different Jewish internal national surveys about their national identity. And actually, in 1930s, much bigger number declares the Jewish national identity that they were declaring in 1920s. In 1920s, more of them declared Polish national identity and Jewish religion. Now, most of them in 1930s they declared Jewish national identity, and they are university students who are the most acculturated. So I think this proves my point that language acculturation and this indeed Polish Yiddish hybrid does not mean that these people buy the ideology of the state, that they consider in some way alien and discriminatory the state that is breaking the democratic promise. Hence, as I'm making point in my book, that also the kind of unexpected or unexpected effect of the Polish state education is the growing political radicalism of the Polish Jewish youth. And it's both expressed in Buddhism that you mentioned, but also it is expressed in a very big popularity of the different streams of Zionist movement and a very strong emigrationist kind of feeling among the Jews in Poland in 1930s. That is also described not only in my book, but in a recent book of Kenneth Moss, previous books of Ezra Mendelssohn and other authors.
You're suggesting here, you're speaking about a hybridity that feels extremely familiar and comfortable to an American living in the United States. I know there are some countries where the notion of hybridity is perhaps strange or marginal or even highly problematic. France comes to mind, but we learned a bit about this in Britain in the first session. Can you envision Poland's unique history permitting a kind of hybrid identity of the sort you're describing? I know it's deep counterfactual, but I'm just curious to know.
Yeah, also like time-wise. So, but it's a great question, Maxine. What I would like, I can say only because it's a great topic for maybe next conference even. But what I want to say, and I think I need to underline that I think we should use the hybridity category, which is a post-colonial studies category.
Okay. Let's give Kamil just a second. I think he's frozen, but I'm sure he'll be right back. This radical claim has caused the technology to become panicked. Okay. Can I get a thumbs up that y'all still see me and that the screen here is still working? Okay,
Yeah.
very good. I expect Kamil to be back in just a moment. And there's one more question that I'd hope to ask him. If he's not able to get back on, yeah, let's see. I think it looks like he popped out. So if he can pop back in, we'll give him a second for that. I hope you are finding his radical challenges to be stimulating and exciting. And perhaps we will give him one more moment. The question that Marcia Rosenblatt asked that we were going to ask him is how ultra-Orthodox women fit into this larger picture. And in particular, the likelihood that women would attend Beis Yaakov was less. Kamil, you're back.
I'm
Excellent.
really sorry. Something happened to my internet provider. Do you hear me?
Yes, perfect.
Okay, so I guess we need to finish. So I want to answer just for 2 minutes, give a very small partial answer to your great question, Maxine. I
Thank you.
think that the hybridity category taken from the post-colonial studies is very important to use to describe the development, the direction in which Polish Jewish culture develops in Interwar Poland, but with a very strong kind of a critical question mark, meaning that there is a notion, especially in Polish language academic literature, to treat Yiddish culture or Polish Jewish culture as a hybrid of Polish. The culture subjugated, that there is this Polish dominant and the subaltern Yiddish or Jewish component. And of course, we here all know that it's totally not the true, that the Jewish and Yiddish culture is transnational, that these young people receive the schools in which they go, they receive books from United States or from land of Israel. Most of their schools are founded by the American Jewish money. If you take Haidt and their moment, they're full of the news what's happening in Eretz Israel, Palestine, Eretz Israel, United States, Soviet Union, etc. So it's there is a Polish Yiddish hybrid, but it doesn't mean that the Yiddish or Jewish component it's the subaltern and subjugated always. Because also the Polish is only the part of the transnational Jewish world. And again, the Yiddish Jewish component is not only created by what's geographically taking Poland, but there is the global and transnational dynamics. And only taking under consideration, we can speak about the Polish Yiddish hybrid.
Fascinating. Thank you so much. Marcia Rosenblatt had a good question for you, but I think that's such a nice note to end on that perhaps I will put you two in touch by email. Marcia, you have my formal apology. Kamil, Kijek, that was just a lovely presentation, very challenging and very exciting. I would like to give the people in the room a chance to stretch their legs for just 15 seconds or so. And then we will introduce Professor Ana Torres, who is going to present the next presentation in our program.
Thank you.
Thank you so much, Kamil. All right. Lovely. Well, I am delighted now to introduce Professor Ana Elena Torres, who is going to be the second speaker in this series. She is going to present to us in a slightly different format, which I think is going to be quite exciting. She is the author of Horizons Blossom, Borders Vanish, Anarchism in Yiddish Literature, published by Yale University Press in 2024. A Bear Flew By, Animality in Yiddish Arts and Literature is forthcoming from Rutgers University Press, which I know you're not talking about, but I hope it will color some of what you present for us today. And Professor Torres is also the co-editor of With Freedom in Our Ears, Histories of Jewish Anarchism from University of Illinois Press, 2023. Professor Torres's work has appeared in the Oxford Handbook of Queer Modernisms, Proof Texts, Jewish Quarterly Review, Nashim, and the journal Makeshift, a journal of feminisms in motion. She's also published in Geveb and Comparative Literature and elsewhere. Her collaborative art practice includes work as a muralist, and I would love to know about the gorgeous mural behind you. She's a contributor to the Yiddish Land Pavilion at the Venice Biennale in 2022, and a commissioned artist by the Polian Museum in Warsaw. You have many things that you could share with us, Professor Torres, but I understand that you will be speaking to us on the topic Multitongued Languaging, Anarchist Language Politics. The floor is yours.
Great. Thank you so much. I really appreciate the invitation from yourself, Max, to the other organizers, and to my co-panelist, Kamil, today. I'm really delighted to have been invited to speak about my book, Horizons Blossom, Borders Vanish. This book is a study of anarchism and Yiddish literature, starting in the period of the proletarian poets, whom I think Matt Johnson discussed earlier, through the modernists of the 1920s and 1930s in the US and Palestine, in Eastern Europe, and continuing to the present by looking at the work of the anti-fascist singer Julia Eisenberg. I'll tell you a little bit of about the book overall for context, and then we'll be looking at some more close readings and case studies about anarchist language politics, thinking about how did anarchists theorize multilingualism and power. So the 4 parts of the book are elegy, which looks at poetic responses to the Haymarket Affair and the generation afterwards, including the widows of those who were termed the Haymarket martyrs. So thinking about elegy as a form of radical grief in anarchist movements. Elegy then moves to genealogy, addressing the question of how Yiddish anarchists understood and constructed their own lineages, such as by claiming biblical and Talmudic proto-anarchist ancestors. There was a lot of interest, for example, in Gideon, the refusal of kingship. So looking for kind of an emic history of Jewish anarchist thought. So we have elegy, genealogy, and then part 3 is about anarchist modernism, centered on the Soviet poet Peretz Markish, looking at the persistence of anarchist aesthetics after his early kind of 1923 period, showing the persistence of anarchist thought in Markish's work. And part 4, which is what we'll be talking about today, is language politics, which looks at a variety of case studies, close readings, and specific moments when Yiddish anarchists were theorizing language and power. So I'll start out by reading a bit from the chapter Multitongued Languaging. Were Yiddish anarchists concerned with the question of a Jewish national language? Did they participate in language reform movements? How did the immigrant labor movement's multilingualism function in organizing spaces and in print? Was anarchist multilingualism distinct among Jewish multilingualism or diglossia? Intrigued by these questions, I arranged an interview with Audrey Goodfriend around 2007. Known in the San Francisco Bay Area for founding the Walden School along the principles of the Ferrer Modern School, Audrey Goodfriend was a lifelong anarchist, a friend of the poet Kenneth Rexroth, and a nurse of Emma Goldman when Goldman was dying. Goodfriend hitchhiked to go take care of her. Goodfriend's parents raised her speaking Yiddish in the Shalom Aleichem houses and were part of Freie Arbeiterstimm's circle. Goodfriend identified as, quote, a red and black diaper baby. Informed that Goodfriend was fond of ending meetings by singing the Internationale, I took care to memorize all of the verses in English and 2 different versions of the Yiddish Internationale from flashcards sitting on the bus, making sure I would not bungle the moment. When I asked whether Goodfriend thought that a sense of Yiddish nationalism or affective attachment to the native language prevailed among the editors of Freie Arbeiterstimme, Goodfriend snapped at me in response, quote, "We published in Yiddish simply because that was the language we spoke best. What are you, an academic?" Goodfriend's reply demonstrates her linguistic pragmatism. She echoes the Freie Arbeiterstimme editor Joseph Cohen's anarchist view of language, which he elaborates in his memoir about trying to build an anarchist farming colony in Michigan. Quote, "I maintain that all languages, like all people, are equal, and that each individual has the right to live and speak in the way he wishes. At the same time, I point out that language has no particular sanctity, which justifies making it a fetish or a cause of dispute. Indeed, in my opinion, the only criterion for language is convenience." Goodfriend's pointed remark also echoes the literary ideology of the Insichisten or the Introspectivist Manifesto of 1919, Wir schreiben Yiddish, weil wir seien Yiddish. We write Yiddish as long as we are Yiddish or Jewish. Anita Norwich describes Yiddish language politics as, quote, the very definition of current discussions of multiculturalism and transnationalism. The anarchists, however, approached language not only as a cultural expression or habitus, but as a tool for remaking the world. This chapter examines how Yiddish anarchists approached language ideology, pragmatism and altruism, utopianism, multilingual praxis, philology, and immigrant socialization. The heterogeneity of anarchist language politics aligns with larger patterns of anarchist resistance to articulating and enforcing a single ideology. Overall, they avoided ascribing a singular ideology to Yiddish while using language choice strategically to evade surveillance. Their wariness towards linguistic singularity reflected a multilingual movement and allowed greater attachment towards Hebrew, where other Jewish leftists, such as Bundists, drew a line before a language associated with religiosity. So that's a little overview of kind of how I'm thinking about Jewish anarchist language politics. There's then a very long section about anarchist critique of Esperanto, which I won't get into today, but it's interesting since Kamil brought up this question of post-colonial frames, was Jewish critique of Esperanto also a kind of decolonial move, this fear that it might be a threat to the smaller languages in some way. So there was a lot of interest in Esperanto in other languages such as AO, which was invented by the anarchist Gordon brothers in Moscow. The idea was to create a scientifically perfect language. So a different aim from Esperanto, but similarly, this was really an age of language utopianism and anarchist critique of Esperanto. Gustav Landauer famously wrote a pamphlet titled "Do Not Learn Esperanto!" Louise Michel, the French communard, also had a critique of Esperanto. So I want to kind of point that out to disambiguate what we might mean by anarchist language politics. It was not synonymous with language utopianism. So I want to move to thinking about what are methodologies for discussing anarchist language politics. One methodology is the comparative mode. So looking at moments of anarchist multilingualism, what could be said in one language that might not be said in the other? How were anarchists using the minor language to negotiate with court surveillance? What were some of the practicalities that come through in moments of translation? And to address this question of language politics and translation, I turn to the work of Kropotkin, who was one of the most significant influences on Jewish anarchist thought. He himself was not Jewish. He was also not anti-Semitic, which was saying something, unfortunately. And so I'm really interested in how did Yiddish anarchists translate Kropotkin? One of his most well-known works, Mutual Aid. If people are not familiar, part of the theory of his book, Mutual Aid, A Factor of Evolution, was emphasizing that, in his view, what the engine of evolution was cooperation rather than competition. So he was trying to recover Darwin from the social Darwinists, in other words. And he wrote famously, quote, "It's not love to my neighbor, whom I often do not know at all, which induces me to seize a pail of water and rush toward his house when I see it on fire." So basically what Kropotkin is trying to say is that mutual aid is not love, it's science. And he's trying to create a scientific vocabulary for anarchism. Mutual Aid was published in English between 1890 and 1896 in the journal The 19th Century, but Kropotkin's opus entered Yiddish through a 3-volume edition, which circulated in the London-based anarchist newspaper Arbeiter Freund. It was translated by Y.A. Marison, who also translated Wilde. I think he also translated Darwin as well. And he translated Mutual Aid in 1913. It was supported by the Kropotkin Literary Society, and I was able to find some of the membership cards, some of the ephemera that kind of in the Labadie Archive in Michigan. So you can think of the reading group as well. What kind of sociality were the anarchists interested in? Overall, Marison's translation uses a lot of Deutschmarisch, so a kind of Germanic way of writing that appealed to a very high register to rhetorically emphasize the biological and scientific way in which Kropotkin was expressing it. He generally turned towards the international terminology and does not use words that would emically be a Jewish vocabulary of mutual aid. For example, Gemach were traditional mutual aid societies. He does not use that kind of terminology. He uses the Germanic scientific way to bring Kropotkin into Yiddish rather than looking for resonances. And this is interesting because in Kropotkin's work itself, he makes reference to what we might think of as a Jewish Gemach. He refers to, quote, the Whitechapel Alliance of Mothers. So these are ways in which women were supporting each other in motherhood in the working class Jewish area of Whitechapel. So Kropotkin is writing about these kind of Jewish mutual aid societies, but not naming it as such. And the Yiddish translation, he doesn't use a word like Gemach or Mithelf. So in the translation that Marison gives, he's working from the 1907 Russian. But what's really significant is that the English edition of mutual aid never uses the word anarchism anywhere in it. He's making a scientific genealogical argument, and he only uses the word unionism once or twice. However, the Yiddish edition of Kropotkin has an introduction which is very forthright about the work's political aims. He adds 7 pages to the Yiddish, which is not in the English or Russian. And Kropotkin writes in the introduction, this is the Yiddish version, quote, I will say it is the greatest pleasure to me to see my work appear in Yiddish. In the present moment, the idea of centralization and centralizing states is so much in fashion, admittedly, even among socialists, that we hear all too frequently people saying that the little nationalities have no reason to exist. Rather, they will become gobbled up by the larger nations and so rapidly forget their mother tongue. My whole life's experience has taught me exactly the opposite. All that I've learned in my life convinced me that the most certain path to bring about harmony from the striving of various nations is for every part of humanity to develop and enrich the language spoken by the masses of that part of humanity. Multilingualism is the surest way to enrich our general heritage, Yerusha, from all nationalities and tribes, which have special value for philosophy, theory, poetry, and art. So this only appears in the Yiddish version of Kropotkin. Scholars, readers of Yiddish literature will be interested that Anna Margolin, the great modernist poet, spent a month with Kropotkin while he was in exile in London. Her husband's memoir describes that every day he sent a car for her and notes that he also sent her home in a car. There was a lot of gossip about Margolin and Kropotkin. But after this exchange, this encounter between Kropotkin and Margolin, Kropotkin becomes really interested in Yiddish. So we might think not only what is the discourse of the little nationalities, this emphasis on the pleasure of Yiddish, this idea of cultural Yerusha that's being taken up, but thinking also of this encounter between the poetic modernist and the anarchist intellectuals. So one methodology for thinking about Yiddish anarchism is through translation. What happens when Kropotkin comes into Yiddish? What's brought to the fore that remains invisible in this moment of translation? What's unsayable and what becomes hypersayable or hypervisible? So that's one methodology for approaching this question. Another methodology that I'm interested in is taking up the term migratory aesthetics. So this is a theoretical mode that centers, rather than thinking about diaspora as something that is about movement and a kind of masculinist valorizing of movement, thinking of diaspora as the circuit. Instead, migratory aesthetics center multiple experiences of stillness, of containment, detention and deportation, rather than that moment of immigration as the moment of movement. Instead, it might think of diaspora migration as a moment of stillness inside. And I find this very useful for looking at material culture that was produced by Jewish anarchists in detention. I'm going to show an image, a couple images of this remarkable newspaper, which was produced by deportees who were awaiting deportation in Ellis Island. And these were handwritten newspapers. So you should be able to see there. Yes, everyone can see this image. Okay, great. So by the 1920s, Ellis Island was packed with hundreds of radicals awaiting deportation from detention centers sent there from across the United States. According to the Hebrew Immigrant Aid Society, or HIAS, 1% of 119,000 Jewish immigrants were deported between July 1st, 1920 and June 30th, 1921. One of the most remarkable documents produced in Ellis Island was Gazeta, or the Isle of Tears Gazette, a multilingual anarchist tribute written by hand by people awaiting deportation. German, Russian, Lithuanian, Yiddish, English, and other languages coexist on the page. Each issue's masthead is calligraphically emblazoned with Gothic lettering or formed from sketches of tree branches, which you can see here. These are one of the handwritten copies. As though detention papers were illuminated manuscripts. 4 issues from January 1920 are extant. The inmate editors declared that here, finally behind bars, they were free of censorship and could at last practice, quote, real freedom of speech. The paper records the procedures and decisions of tribunal meetings, and Kenyon Zimmer, the labor historian, notes that, quote, detainees instituted full communism among themselves, with the self-proclaimed Ellis Island Soviet collecting voluntary weekly contributions to purchase food from the canteen and distribute to those in need. One Gazeta article describes the detention center as the commune, invoking the Paris Commune, the fortress of resistance within the city. Quote, the spirit of communism is daily unfolding itself here on Ellis Island. And just to note at this point, the term communism and socialism and anarchism were used often as a kind of umbrella term. So it's not to say communism as opposed to anarchism in this context. They're referring to the commune. Each surviving issue of Gazeta begins with Russian, adding Lithuanian, English, Yiddish, Ukrainian, and other languages written by different hands. The first page records a resolution, quote, passed at the general meetings which took place on the Island of Tears in rooms 204 and 206. It implores, comrade workers, we are sure that the time is close when the American proletariat will extend its hand to the proletariats of all countries in the fight for the liberation of workers from the capitalist system, a system of oppression, violence, and slavery. The newspaper Gazeta is largely composed, as you just heard, in the second person. So they are speaking to one another, just as they are writing it by hand, and they are distributing this throughout this space of detention. So again, the lens of migratory aesthetics is very useful here for thinking about the experience of migration as one of containment. I want to read just another passage from Gazeta. This one, it's written at the top, 6 days that shook Ellis Island, and it narrates daily detention life. Quote, between bad stomachs and the U.S. Department of Justice, it's difficult to say which is causing more trouble to the officials at Ellis Island. So throughout, there's also this very anarchic sense of humor, the way that they describe the guards, the way that they make this system of power and containment visible from the inside, the way that they address one another. They continue, quote, a week ago, they did not figure on having so many Reds here. That's the prison guards. Now they stay a while and they go away muttering, damn these Bolsheviks, we can't understand them. Of course they can't understand us, not even if they live 1,000 years. So here there's this pun on how multilingualism is functioning inside of this detention center, who is legible to one another, who is opaque. They continue, quote, it must be admitted that the U.S. Department of Justice is working very hard to destroy communist ideals. Instead of destroying communist principles and ideals, they are rather helping to build them up. Our organization here is a miniature of a commune. The basis of existence is the predominance of the collective spirit as opposed to the spirit of individualism. So far, this principle developed that it is becoming difficult to tell the characteristics of one comrade from that of another. And then it describes moments of mutual aid, people kind of shaving each other's beards, getting cigarettes to one another, the lady comrades helping them out, raising money for, quote, the lady comrades. And then there's a lot of very vivid description of language diversity among the detainees. Quote, there are those nations who express their instinct for music through the individual, such as France and Italy, and then they compare the folk songs of French and Italian comrades to those who are singing in Russian and Yiddish. So there's a kind of autoethnographic sense being produced inside. And I just wanted to note that you can see here the handwritten quality, the multilingual quality, and also just think of the physical object, how it was passed from one to the other, the marks of the individual. Gazzetta records the minutiae of life centering cooperative sociality. They keep minutes of meetings. They have a section in German that's kind of a joke page. They have a satire page, etc. The humor of migratory aesthetics scorns the maudlin image of the deportee. Upon learning that the tycoon Henry Frick, whom he had attempted to assassinate in revenge for unleasing Pinkertons upon striking miners, had died before Alexander Berkman, one of the most prominent anarchists, partner of Emma Goldman. So when Berkman found out that Frick had just died, he wrote, quote, "I'm glad he left the country before me." So there are all of these moments of jokes, satire, anecdotes in the newspaper itself. One of them wrote, quote, "On the Isle of Tears, not a single one of us has shed a single tear. This is the normal order of things. Communist revolutionaries do not cry. Instead, we organize. This speaks to the rebellious spirit that strikes at the bars of the iron grate." Gazetta's editors remarked on the irony of practicing uncensored speech from within a detention center on the threshold of deportation. Indeed, during the nearly month-long voyage, the Bufords self-organized militants, enthralled, and even converted a few of the prison guards to take up anarchist ideals by the time they landed. In spaces of constraint, detention centers, and the deportation ship itself, anarchist speech persisted and, ironically, encountered less regulation and less monolingualism than it had in the surveilled common spaces of the metropolis. So I want to use this as an example of migratory aesthetics. How might we think about diaspora differently? And in contrast to what we have just looked at, I wanted to bring in, continuing this comparative method, bring in another way in which the radical deportee, the Yiddish revolutionary, was visually presented. One of the most powerful languages at play in the multilingual press was the visual language of cartoons and newsreels. Cartoons visualized and disseminated specters of Judeo-Bolshevism, the essentialized association between Jewish individuals and communism, or anarchism. One of these was the cartoon series Fizbumski, which starred a hapless would-be Slavic assassin with a cap and beard, which kind of updates the familiar anti-Semitic caricatures. Another cartoon illustrated the Buford departing as Uncle Sam waves from a pier, coattails flapping, as he declares sarcastically, "It is more blessed to give than to receive." So this moment of sending back the deportees. Deportation tableaux were imagined, illustrated, and staged across media. In 1978, a newsreel was unearthed from the Yukon tundra. This is brief digression, but absolutely fascinating. The way that some of these newsreels persisted is because at the end of the gold rush town, they were actually buried in tundra, and so they didn't ignite because chemically these newsreels were very unstable. So that is where the nitrate film reel that I'm about to show you was actually found. This is a news clip titled "America Bids Farewell to Red Agitators." And it is a silent newsreel. The decayed film's images, which is what you're looking at right now, its images crackle at the edge as though surrounded by flames. We see a throng of men walk along a pier in Jersey City, carrying small suitcases, packages, and in one man's hand, a guitar. Intertitles describe them as, quote, undesirables from all parts of the country. One man stands out from the rest, visually striking with his mustache, round spectacles, and high-buttoned shirt, clutching a leather bag. In both this footage and still photographs of the embarkment, he directly returns the camera's gaze. As he stands poised to step off the pier onto the waiting barge, intertitles interrupt, "Goodbye," and "Censored." The cops heave a sigh of relief. 6 men in police uniform or civilian suits wave contemptuously toward the water, laughing. The clip then cuts to a rickety, unseaworthy looking ferry, its tugboat blowing steam as it pulls out of the harbor. The decks are empty. Neither sailor nor deportee looks back. This newsreel delivers a conventionally cinematic scene, from the officers' jollity to the stricken faces of the deportees. Since their inception, newsreels were constructed pastiches, often packaged to falsely represent historical events. Just for example, in early film history, there was a newsreel about Alfred Dreyfus, but it was played by an actor. It wasn't actually Dreyfus. So we can think of this as this news clip that I just showed you, this newsreel, as part of this kind of visual iconography of deportation, which was also staged. Because if we compare the spectacle of the officers triumphantly waving farewell to the quote Reds departing, compare that with Goldman's account of the actual scene, which happened at 4 a.m. The deportees were marched onto the ship, quote, deep snow lay on the ground, the air was cut by a biting wind. A row of armed civilians and soldiers stood along the road. One by one, the deportees marched, flanked on each side by the uniformed men, curses and threats accompanying the thud of their feet on the frozen ground. So compare that description of what happened to the way in which the image of the deportee was staged here, and also think about what each description makes visible. How does the newsreel, the stage newsreel, make power visible? How does it stage the moment of expulsion versus how do those texts written by the deportees multilingually, right, in Gazzetta, describe power and how it's negotiated? And in an ironic twist, the ship, the Buford, ended its career as a Hollywood prop, serving as the set for Buster Keaton's film The Navigator from 1924. So when we talk about multilingualism, I always so want to include the visual as one language as well. So I'll just conclude here with, just a brief last mention. But there are many other case studies for considering the heterogeneity of anarchist language politics. How do they represent power? How did they think about the language? How did they think about language pragmatically? How was it used to subvert surveillance? How is it used to create these multilingual spaces inside of detention? So I'll end. The study of language politics illuminates how linguistic difference informed First Amendment trials. At stake is not only what was said, but what language it was spoken in. From Judge Clayton's literacy tests and anti-suffragism to the New York City Police's targeting of the underground Yiddish press, anti-militarist and reproductive speech were both charged in gendered and racialized campaigns. The twinning of sedition and obscenity charges confirmed anarchists' critique of both discursive and geographic borders, right? Because what are the two forms of illegal speech at this point, right? It's information about sex, reproductive health, and it's anti-militarist, right? So obscenity and sedition are the two forbidden forms of speech. By attending to historical questions of language politics, migratory aesthetics, and translation, we may better hear their contemporary echoes. The racialized politics of language difference applied to Yiddish and Russian speakers persists today, though the targeting of speakers of Spanish, Arabic, indigenous South American languages, and others. The anarchist philosopher Thomas Nail argues, quote, we should think about borders not just as dividing lines between countries, but as cultural and aesthetic structures that also have effects on legal policy, law enforcement, and thus the lives and deaths of migrants. Nail continues, the circulation of media images has its own kind of migration and its own kind of borders that are not necessarily spatially or temporally congruent with the migrant bodies at the border or in detention. There's simply no way to fully understand migration, politics, and criminalization without understanding migrant image as part of the process, confronting their own barriers and waging their confrontations. By strategically using courtroom statements, orations, and handwritten newspapers, the Russian Yiddish anarchists, quote, waged their confrontation against deportation and contributed to a genealogy of borderless anti-deportation critique. Their histories demonstrate that struggles for free speech were and remain inseparable from multilingualism.
Thank you so much, Professor Torres. That was inspiring and remarkable. And I love that the two of you were able to present together because you're doing different things that are so, forgive me for using this language, but in conversation with one another. I'd like to invite anyone who is here with us on Zoom to put your comments and questions in the chat. We also are happy to take your questions if you want to raise your hand. It looks like we have a question from Galia Diamond Berman. Would you like to ask your question or make your comment?
Yeah, hi. I'm wondering how other Jewish groups at the time with maybe different ideological aims were reacting to these deportations. Was there a sense of support for these people or maybe shame? And yeah, just what was that reaction?
Yeah, so this was the period of the so-called first Red Scare. There are other images, for example, Yankov Glatstein's poem 1919. There are images that seem to evoke the deportations, and Glatstein was not associated with anarchist movements, but there was a great deal of coverage throughout the Yiddish press of these deportations. I was interested particularly in the kind of writing and material culture that was produced inside the detention centers themselves. To study anarchist history means to look at prison letters, at love letters, at journals, at ephemera, at material that is itself migratory. It's not a history of the novel in the same way. And so that's part of why I assembled this archive. But in terms of how were the deportations covered, there was a lot of coverage of it. Certainly, for example, in the Forverts, which was a socialist paper.
Thank you so much. Kamil, would you like to respond to your co-panelist?
No, I wanted to ask a question.
Please feel.
Yeah. So, Anna, thank you for really fascinating talk and the fascinating sources that you presented. And actually, I wanted to ask about this Gazeta, the Ellis Island. I don't know, periodical newspaper, because on the one vignette that you showed, it was in Russian written "Да здравствуй, коммунистический интернационал," that is "Long live the Communist International," and it was the issue from 7th of January 1920. So already 2.5 years after the October Revolution, that there is a strong split among the revolutionary movement, already communist Bolshevik dictatorship, and a very strained relations with anarchists and other revolutionary movements. So my question is, to what extent the language fluidity of the Gazeta and the Ellis Islands let me rephrase. To what extent the language fluidity of the Gazeta reflects the ideological fluidity of these revolutionaries who are in Ellis Islands, and they can be anarchist, SR, communist, Bundism, etc. And then to what extent we can speak about the anarchist newspaper or wider revolutionary one? Thanks.
Yeah, thank you. That's a really great question. I think fluidity is a really great word. There was an understanding that capitalism is what they were in common struggle against. I think that if we look at other anarchist newspapers, for example, Freie Gesellschaft, they commemorated the anniversaries of the Russian Revolution by printing the newspaper completely in red ink. So there was also a kind of ongoing commemorative attachment towards it. There are other accounts where we see really the opposite, where it was possible for people to organize in person for a common labor goal, but it was not possible for them to write a newspaper together. That's what split everything apart. There was this attempt in, I think it was 1890, to create a joint communist, anarchist, socialist newspaper in New York City. Everyone had been getting along great. They were in the same union. They could not write an editorial. Everything exploded. They produced one issue, and it was panned as, quote, parva lokshen. It was neither milk nor meat. It was neither communist nor anarchist. So I think there are some moments in which the umbrella of anti-capitalism works very well to organize together and to write together, and other moments in which the fluidity was frozen, I guess, to continue that. I think the fact that they were all facing deportation and they were negotiating with experiences of statelessness in different ways. I write also about the trial and the deportation of Molly Steimer and Jacob Abrams, and you might be surprised when you read how they speak about the US because they see themselves as calling America to account to rise and fulfill its own highest ideals of democracy. They're using a language that you might find patriotic and sentimental. I think Abrams refers to Abraham Lincoln as his father, his ancestor, and the judge says, "What do you mean you're not American?" He says, "No, he is my ancestor," because he had an ideology of freedom. So there is a great deal of fluidity, and I think it's important to also see how that fluidity is affective. Their attachment to the United States, their attachment to the ideals of the Russian Revolution as well. Of course, after they were deported, Goldman and others, she writes My Disillusionment in Russia. But there are moments in which that fluidity and coalition building is possible. And I think some of these newspapers were those moments, but other newspapers it was impossible. I think we can really, part of my anarchist methodology is not trying to force ideological consistency. I'm interested instead in these moments of affective solidarity in which some other way of being together becomes possible. And I think this is one of them.
Yeah. Thank you so much. It looks like we have Matt Johnson there with a question.
Yeah. Hey, Matt.
Hey, nice to see you. Thank you for the talk. And the sources are so fascinating. I was talking about Morris Rosenfeld earlier, and Marison was played a very important role in Rosenfeld's first book, so that's lovely. But I wanted to ask if you could say, I think there's often this tendency, right? There's a lot of interest and been a lot of recent research about the interest in of Yiddish writers in this interwar early 20th century period in world literature or but I think one of the fascinating things about what you're bringing is also there's an interest in Yiddish by others, Kropotkin being an extremely interesting example of that. I wonder if you could say more about what was driving that interest, and was it just pragmatic? Was it just a pragmatic kind of, well, there's a large group of workers who are speaking Yiddish, who are active in certain political movements, and therefore Yiddish is interesting? Or is there something more at stake in an interest in a diasporic language, a non-state language? I also think of Rudolf Rocker, who is also an interesting case of this. But I just wonder if you could say a bit more about the interest of non-Yiddish speakers in Yiddish, or even in learning Yiddish like Rocker does. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. That's such a great question. So Kropotkin, right, he was in a sense, shall we say, of social intimacy with Anna Margolin, and there were I think intellectual traces of that encounter that continue in his work. For Kropotkin, his image of anarchism I see as deeply ecological, where there's multiplicity and only cooperation will allow us to survive, right? So I think multilingualism fits very well within an ecological vision of the world. For an anarchist like Rudolf Rocker, he was referred to as the anarchist rabbi, right? He lived in London. There has been a lot of attention to the fact that he was a non-Jew who learned Yiddish. He was editing Arbeiter Freund and wrote memoirs in Yiddish. There's been a lot of interest in him recently by William Anderson, who writes on Black anarchism as well. But there's an oral history by his son, Fermín Rocker, which is in the British Library. I don't think it was digitized, so I had to listen to it on the big headphones in the library. And one of the things that Fermín Rocker says, Fermín was an artist, when he talks about his father, he says, oh, everybody says that everyone talks about how he learned Yiddish and he spent time with the Jewish immigrants in Whitechapel in London, but they don't talk about the fact that he also learned Spanish and he was spending time with the Spanish anti-fascists as well. So it was not it was not a binary bilingualism, right? There was also the presence of Spanish and Spanish deportees or kind of revolutionary satellites. So once we make that into a trilingual relationship, I think we get more of the texture of what anarchist multilingualism was like. I write also about Alexander Harkavi, who was a linguist. He was an anarchist. He was an editor of Freie Gesellschaft. He wrote linguistics articles in the anarchist press. And there's one that I write about where he talks about this question of loan words. How do we linguistically think about a loan word? And then he says, but property is theft, right? So he's kind of bringing in this anarchist idea around property, the critique of property for talking about linguistics. But I mentioned Harkavi because he wrote a dictionary which was trilingual, English, Yiddish, and Hebrew. So again, it's moving away from a bilingual model of language politics. We just had Molly Crabapple and Mindel Cohen speak about the Bund on Friday. And what's interesting about the Bund, right, it came to be known as a Yiddish cultural movement, but that singularity or the centering of Yiddish emerged from a multilingual milieu, right? It didn't start out as Yiddishism in the same way. So when we contrast Jewish anarchist language politics with Bundism or with Zionist Hebraism, I don't think it becomes singular in the same way, right? Harkavi writes trilingually. His dictionary is trilingually. Rocker, there's Yiddish and Spanish together. Those were both cultural worlds of anti-fascism he was embedded in. And then Kropotkin, of course, everything is ecological. Why would language be any different?
Thank you. That's lovely.
Yeah. Oh, and also just to answer Matt's question, Voltairine de Cleyre, who's buried in by the Haymarket Martyrs in Chicago in Waldheim, she was a Catholic anarchist and she also learned Yiddish. And I write a bit about her as well. And for her, affectively, it was complicated. I think she had very deep yearning to kind of be one of the Jewish anarchists, and I think she felt some sense of social exclusion. Her letters are very, very emotional when she's writing to the editor of Freie Gesellschaft. But she was, for her, it was pragmatic, but I think also there was an emotional yearning for the culture of Yiddish radicalism.
Wow. It's remarkable. I see your colleague Sheila Jelen is on, and we miss you very much, Sheila. Would you like to ask or comment?
Yeah, thank you. Thank you for thank you for organizing this wonderful conference. And I'm sorry I'm not there with you. My question is kind of piggybacking on a few comments you've made, Anna, about Hebrew. And I'm just wondering, I mean, we know that there was a history of animosity between Hebrew and Yiddish, particularly at the, beginning of the 20th century. And I wonder, you make it sound like, this kind of internationalism, smoothed that all over. And, Hebrew was just one of the languages that they embraced. And I just wonder if you could speak a little bit more about that. Whether, I mean, this is not my area of expertise at all, but I was just wondering if there's any kind of evidence of unique animosity toward Hebrew among these people, and what Hebrew represents, both in terms of Zionist nationalism, but also just in terms of, religious culture. And if you could sort of speak a little bit more to that, I'm curious.
Yeah, thank you. That's a great question. And I think it's very contextual because for a poet like Peretz Markish to be using Loshen Kodesh inside of his Yiddish, that was an act of defiance. Like that was a kind of anti-authoritarianism because it was so taboo. And so, for example, after he died, his wife, Esther Markish, got the galleys of the proofs, right? And she talks about how the word Yid was like crossed out and replaced with Mensch. And so I'm not comparing so much Hebrew and Yiddish, but I'm interested more in the Deutschmarsch and the Loshen Kodesh poetic components inside of it. And I think there were ways in which Loshen Kodesh was deployed in a kind of anti-assimilationist way, where what they were resisting was any form of universalism that would erase Yiddishness. And I think it's interesting that Kropotkin is arguing for the survival of a cultural minority, as he himself was not, but he is seeing value, and it's somewhat of a decolonial move, right? Rather than saying we will have equality when everyone can speak English or Esperanto, it's against the dissolution of Yiddish. And so I think Lashon Kodesh is used in that way. And there are many interesting ways in which, in the Soviet context, Markish is using words like Hefker, for example, which I think Matt Johnson's also interested in, but ways in which it becomes defiant to be using a Hebrew vocabulary in a way that it may not in the New York context, because where the line of censorship fell was quite different. So yeah, the internal politics of the language is something I'm interested in. I also write in this book about someone named Yankov Meir Zelkind, who was an anarchist rabbi, and he translated the Talmud into Yiddish. And he was the rabbi of Sholem Schwarzbard, the assassin. Really, somebody needs to write maybe a rock opera about him, just fascinating figure. But for him, what he saw in Yiddish anarchism was very defiant of an anti-Semitic culture. And so he wasn't anti-Hebrew, right? He went and he settled, I think, in Haifa, and he kind of had a circle of religious Jewish anarchists. And I think it can be mind-bending for some people that the line of statism and anti-statism doesn't fall the same way in Jewish anarchist history as it may in the non-Jewish world. The way that they thought about land and territory and diaspora was not fully secular, because for it to have been fully secular, they would have seen that as the dissolution of difference in some cases. So I have seen, of course, many were very anti-clerical, because they saw it as patriarchal, but others saw it as a resource for their political imagination. Like Yosef Ludin is interested in finding examples of mutual aid within Hasidic tales, and Emma Goldman does that as well. So yeah, it isn't a secular religious dichotomy, so it also can't be antagonistic to Hebrew in the same way that you may find in different other contexts. That would be one quick, not so quick response. But Chaim Rothman also writes about anarchism among Hasidic writers, and he's looking more at theology rather than social movement, rather than a labor movement, but there it's very engaged with Hebrew.
Thank you.
Sure.
Thank you so much. It looks like we have Diego Rothman now with a question.
Hi, thank you very much. And I want to know, it's more a comment or maybe an intention to connect with the panel that we had yesterday here about the Dibuk, with the great talk by Agi and my humble contribution regarding Jigan and Schumacher's parody, because what I'm interested actually to connect is the staging of the expelling of this strange voice. And I think it's so interesting how the stage, I was talking about the staging about Jigan and Schumacher's parody, what they were doing, they were telling about, it's dealing of course with the language politics, about how Yiddish, coming from as an immigrant spirit, entered into the state's body, and actually the state is attempting to expel this body. The other connection in this staging is this fact that one of the characteristics of Dibuk possession is the multilingualism and the use of language that the possessed person didn't know, and it is extremely interesting in the way it connects to the Gazeta that they were writing, and that liminal space, that is the moment when it is not here and there, and they are before the moment of being expelled of the state. It is, you couldn't see the film that I was showing yesterday, that is also real, from the news. It's also this moment in which actually what Jigan and Schumacher are staging is the moment that they are feeling being expelled by the state, because they were a threat to the monolinguist country. So there is a very amazing connection through the staging of those comments. So that was my comment.
Yeah, that's amazing. Thank you. I hadn't thought of that other resonance of the word expulsion, like for the Dybbuk. And like for me, the newsreel is, I mean, there's so much to say about it, but it's filmed in a way where you're supposed to identify with the police, right, who are waving goodbye and saying good riddance, right? And yet you're also, it's this moment where, although it's semi staged, because it's not the Buford itself, it's the ferry that would take you somewhere. But instead, you do actually become confronted by the face of the deportee. So how is power and powerlessness made visible or made invisible? But I hadn't thought of expulsion in the metaphysical sense.
I keep going back with everything you're saying. I keep going back to your observation about stillness and containment, and that radically changes the way I think not only about the people you're talking about, but in some ways about this whole conference, because there is so much in this, if you will, early 20th century period. I know it extends in both directions for a lot of us, that feels like a dynamic of constant movement, and you're reminding us or pushing us to sit with the stillness of it is fascinating. I have a small question. I'm wondering about the age of the people who participated in this particular set of movements. I know that when we think about migration, there are ways of pinpointing and saying, this was a migration of mostly unmarried men, or this was a migration of families with small children. I think in some ways my brain is fixed on a post-Holocaust perspective of young adults. But is there a demographic for you? Is there an age demographic or a gender demographic, or is this kind of like an everybody phenomenon?
Yeah, that's such a good question. There's a book forthcoming by Kenyon Zimmer, which is a mass biography of everybody who is on the Buford. So I would say to keep an eye out for that. It's a really interesting, I think, also trend in anarchist studies. Kathy Ferguson, the political scientist, is writing a group biography of, I think it's 1,000 anarchist women. So this question of how do we represent a collective body? How do we represent the individual life within the movement is something that anarchist historiography is really interested in. So yeah, my sense is similar, that it was young adults, primarily men, who were being deported on the Buford. It's also an irony, like if we think about the Haymarket affair as well, right? All of the people who were executed were men. Their wives were often far more militant than they were, but the women were not subjected to political persecution in the same way because they were intellectually underestimated or invisible in some sense. So yeah, it's interesting, right? The widows who survived, they went on, they carried on the newspaper, the Alarm. They became militant writers. Alfred Parsons' wife, Lucy Parsons, was far more militant than he was in her rhetoric. But she was not a target of state violence in the same way that they were. But then again, the way that Emma Goldman was described by the press was highly sexualized. There's a description of her body when she's on the stand at, I think it was one of the free speech trials for distributing information about reproductive health. They describe her body as, quote, as plump as an anarchist bomb, right? Like this kind of image of her being voluptuous as being somehow explosive, literally. So yeah, the question of who was targeted and who was visible in the labor they were doing, I think it's something that historiographers right now are trying to address by writing these mass biographies, these like group biographies of the anarchist movement. But yeah, the people I'm writing about were largely young adults. One way that I try to open the canon is by looking also at translators who may have been women and thinking about translation, its labor and its creativity, taking that seriously. And it's also a way to include more women's voices. Even if the authors were men, you can think about the work of the translator.
That's wonderful. That's wonderful, because there are so many reasons for the invisibility of women in this tradition, but there's no sense that there's just so much more to say. And so I think as you note and as you describe, there's a need for a methodological consciousness and experimentation to get at some of this material that shouldn't be hidden. Yeah, thank you so much. We would have time for one more question, if there is one more, or perhaps Anna, you have one more observation you'd like to share. Can you talk a little bit about how I'll ask you the question that I sort of asked yesterday at the end of the session there, but I'm going to ask it in a bit of a different way. So much of your work is pulling in threads from all over, whether that's historically or methodologically, and yet it clearly your work takes you to a place as you go along, not always the same place. But is there something that you would share with us, either methodologically or in terms of your critical reading and rendering, about how you get to any particular moment in your insights? Like, how much of this is about language? How much of it is about politics? But how much of it is also about the humanity or the livingness of what you're talking about, given that your work extends beyond humanity?
Yeah, thank you. And I think you're referencing that I also work on animality, right? The book that I'm writing now is about the image of dancing bears in Yiddish literature, the anxiety of creativity, the idea of the bear as the proximate other to the human, this idea of the relationality between art and trauma, right? Because the way that people identify with the bear is very complicated. That's all I'll say, because today's about anarchism. But yeah, the question of methodology, that was also a question I had for Kamil, I think, because we're both thinking about radicalism and language, and are there ways in which you think about your methodology as being radical, or are we using our discipline's methodologies and applying it to radical subjects, or are we thinking about doing something else, or having an experimental methodology to write about the history of Jewish radicalism? That was one question I had when I was listening to Kamil's. And I think because anarchist history requires a lot of looking, a lot of archival work, and I mentioned also doing interviews with older anarchists like Audrey Goodfriend, right? The anecdote that I started with, where I was told that she ends every interview by singing the Internationale, and I didn't know which version, so I had to memorize all of them, right? So yeah, I think that in this case it does demand a methodology that's going to be responsive to the kind of archives and the kind of oral histories that we have. Like, it has to stretch around what can become available, right? And not discount something because it was written in pencil in a prison, right? So that the methodology has to grow around what we're looking for. Maybe that's one way of thinking about it. And I think it also, one aspect that's particular to anarchist methodology is putting life at the center and voice at the center. And if we look, for example, at Paul Averich's work, right? One of his books is called Anarchist Portraits. One is called Anarchist Voices. It's unlike a meta level kind of maybe some of the tropes of Marxist political science where the human is very distant, the individual is very distant. I think that anarchist historiography as a field tends to recenter the life of the person who struggles.
Thank you so much. Thank you very, very much, Anna. And thank you so much, Kamil. I am so grateful to all of you for sticking with us. I hope you found this as inspiring as I did. If you are local, please come join us again at 2:30 for a wrap-up session with Adi Mahalel. And thank you all so much. We hope to see you again soon. And this was just a real treat.
Thank you so much. And to the other people who presented, if you would like to share your work, I would love to read it. If you have any notes, feel free to email me. I'd be happy to be in conversation about your work.
Sounds lovely.